Welcome to the Renaissance Sermon. I am your host, Sleepy, and I'm going to be your mystic for today. And when it comes down to starting the episode, for those that don't know, we start off with a little meditation, a little guided practice, and if you will, close your eyes, and we're going to start with some deep breaths here. Okay, so what I want you to do is breathe in through your nose. We're going to do it slowly, and then what we're going to do is we're going to force all of that air into the lower lung, the lower lobe of the lung. Okay, just want to get all that stagnant energy out. Okay, so as you're breathing in, we're going to do a slow, maybe a slow 3 count, let's say. Nice. Okay, exhale slowly. All right, nice. And try to exhale and through your belly, using your belly, right? You want to really get that stagnant air out of your particular lung, right? Okay, so we're going to inhale again, make sure it's through the nose, lower lobe of the lung. Nice. Exhale slowly. All right, and with that exhale, we're just going to let go of all of the troubles, all the responsibilities, all those stresses just eating you up, any type of obligations, credit card debt, anything. Just let it all go. All right, nice. Good job. Okay, we're going to do one more. Inhale, lower in through the nose, into the lower lung. Nice. Then we're going to exhale. Try to start with the lower lung. Push through the lower lung if you can with your belly. Okay? And with that exhale, we're just going to let go of all of the stresses really eating at us throughout the week. All those obligations, responsibilities, credit card debt, just let it all go. Nice. Good job. Okay. Now, with your eyes still closed, what we're going to do is we're going to imagine an entity of our choice, right? So if this is God for you, if this is some kind of deity, just imagine it. Even if it's a demon, we don't judge here, okay? Just imagine it, okay? Good. Now, what I want you to do right now is I want you to imagine just how much this entity is worth to you. Good. And try to get is in terms of just thinking about how much of that number you have on your credit card available now. Just think about that, and without even thinking about this, I want you to go to the link in the description, and I want you to go to the coffee and donate whatever amount that is to that coffee. Okay? Good. Okay? Nice. Now, what I want you to do is close your eyes one more time and just imagine that entity smiling right back at you. That's right, you did a great job. Okay, so the astrology for the week, we got a Mercury Kazemi in Leo, or basically the sun joining Mercury in the actual astrological chart. This is a significant event. It happens, definitely not every month, maybe like every 3 months or something like that, but it's a very very interesting event, and I'm really always fighting not to give too much information on these things, but I really want you guys to go through and look at the YouTubers, because they do a great job, and they'll explain what that means for your particular sign. Okay. Other than that, we've got things building up. If we zoom out, of course, things are insane, but in terms of right now, what we're looking at, that should do it, and we'll talk a little bit more. Now, with this episode, we're going to really start off with a particular card pull, right? And this is from the Oracle deck, the Herbal Astrology Oracle deck specifically, and this is by Adriana Ayales, right? And the card that was pulled is Valerian, okay, with the subtext of acceptance. Okay, so I'm going to read the description here and then give you just a few thoughts regarding this particular episode. Okay. Order, loosening, acceptance, embracing, imperfection, persistence, flow. Ancient physicians referred to this plant as fu due to the pungency of its smell, referenced in text as smelly old socks, while other names of the plant, such as all-heel and cutfinger, are common. The Latin origin of Valerian's name comes from valere, meaning to be strong and healthy. In medieval Sweden, Valerian was sometimes placed in the wedding clothes of the groom to ward off envy of the elves and protect the marriage. It was said to be used by witches to protect and unbind those who were the target of evil spells. The Nordic goddess of Hertha put Valerian on her riding crop, causing the stag she rode to increase in power and speed. In combination with the bridle of hops, Valerian is suspected to have helped facilitate the journey between realms, the liminal space often inhabited by witches, or between waking and sleeping life. Both the Greeks and Celts used Valerian to ward off evil, traditionally hanging it in bunches around the windows to repel spirits and protect the home from lightning. They also used it to consecrate ritual tools, promote peace, provide purification, break hexes, enhance stability, and happiness. A growing number of clinical trials now show how various types of Valerian improve sleep quality and alleviate insomnia, exhaustion, fatigue, and pain. Valerian resembles Neptune's archetype, as the herb powerfully greatly relaxes the body and mind to experience deep states of rest, sleep, and even access to other worlds. Neptune is the planet of dreams, other realms, the subconscious mind, the psychic mind, the imagination, and a fundamental connection to spirituality. Valerian assists us in abandoning the story that keeps us bound to one reality, allowing us to access beyond our physical body into a greater mystical reality. Valerian supports us by widening our trigger points and helping us zoom out of a situation that might be overloading you with anxiety or stress. Remember, go easy on yourself and don't push yourself too hard to meet goals. Valerian remedies the internal parts of ourselves that can embody mouse energy when we're feeling overly analytical and judgmental in high trigger mode. The message here is to take measure. Although your foundation can be established with great order, there is a certain amount of flow needed in order to enjoy creativity and growth. Don't exhaust yourself in the details. Embrace your imperfections. Now, I think first off, when it comes down to this concept, Valerian, we need to come to an understanding, I would say, of the idea of sleep and really a more accurate perception of sleep in general, because this idea of valerian. It's really associated with sleep, right? If you go to your, any herbalist, they'll tell you, say, hey, look, this might be a good thing to actually take in terms of actually getting a good night's rest. Now, when it comes down to sleep, what we really need to understand is this description. It also described how valerian would ward off certain things, right? So certain concepts. I want to say too, it repelled spirits, and it was also really, was it used to, so it was used to unbind those who were the targets of evil spells, right? I think we need to have a good understanding. One, if you're not sleeping well, you definitely need to hear this understanding and really take into account this understanding. When we don't sleep, when we are kind of suffering from certain things, like suffering from lack of sleep in any way, we should understand this as kind of the accumulation of bad energy in a way. Okay, so this is a perspective to where you don't need to necessarily have your foot into the mystical realm to understand, but it will kind of carry over in terms of how you treat yourself and how you treat the idea and the concept around sleep. And this is interesting because we got this operational intelligence in society that greatly differs from our research backed intelligence, right? So we have this operation of society that doesn't really value sleep and promote sleep in the ways that it should in terms of actually creating a healthy populace. And we'll get into this a bit later in one of the segments where we talk about how this society is really constructed and systemized in ways that make us sick, and this is literally and figuratively. So we should definitely learn to take better care of ourselves. And I'll end the actual reading there, and but I want to say that is the hospitals for the homeless section particularly that I'm referring to. So if that resonates with you, maybe you should hear that particular section. Now, this first section is from the Book of Unlimited Hangouts, chapter Darktrace in Cyber Reason, and our translator is Johnny Vedmore. Now, this is a quote from Johnny from the article, or the chapter, excuse me. We're now at a point in history where either the coming events will be studied for thousands of years or will be remembered as the point where we lost humanity completely. Now, in this chapter, Johnny reaffirms the idea that really the weird tech bros may be leading our society into the AI future as if they were creating software in their mom's basement. Okay? And this is very simple. It comes down to one quote that a lot of us may have heard, right? And that quote is, move fast and break things. Okay? When you're like jerking off in a sock and you're like working on your mom's computer, that's not a problem. You can do that. That's not an issue at all, actually. But when it comes down to people's lives, this becomes something very dark, very fast. Especially when you got this, when you suffer particularly from this very real, really what is actually a mental illness, which should be an actual psychology-backed understanding and definition behind this mental illness. But this idea, it really arises from being surrounded by yes men or people who just want the money that you could provide them, right? Now, even though many of these people are just ordinary, like at best slightly above ordinary in intelligence, and they believe themselves to be brilliant and see really their money as really just an actual something that is tangible that proves their brilliance, right? And we talked about this concept before, right? This idea of the talk about this particular idea. This can be explained by a zodiac sign, right? And just bear with me for a second. This idea of Sagittarius rules over things like wealth, luck, riches. And it also rules over the idea of higher knowledge, intelligence, philosophy, okay? So these people, they see themselves and this light, and there's a very real understanding behind the impulse to see your wealth as proof of your intelligence and your ability to philosophize, I guess. But the reality is that these two things aren't connected in a way to where wealth should be treated as tangible evidence of intelligence. So this idea, I think, is really explained by this idea of Elon Musk, right? He live streamed himself playing a video game that he claimed to be one of the best at, right? He was on the top leaderboards or something, right? And after this particular, kind of live stream, and everybody kind of got up in a hay about it, he admitted to actually paying someone to boost his profile to appear to be a top-ranked player, right? And to seasoned players who reviewed the live stream, it was obvious that he had no real experience or skill. But he was so disillusioned that he felt comfortable turning on the live stream and playing the game in front of millions of Twitter users, right? And there are plenty of things wrong with Elon in general, and I invite you to check out Elon Musk and the Renaissance, where I showcase more. But what is really disturbing is the little regard that this man has for human life in general. I've hypothesized that this culture is really just something that is plaguing the Silicon Valley types in general, though, right? Now, back to this particular chapter. When it comes to AI, Johnny points out how these guys are rushing into really unventured space where we should most certainly be baby stepping, okay? And this particular idea of rushing turns really brings in this idea of, or this understanding of how we rushed into the nuclear energy age, the age of nuclear energy, if you will, right? And it's simple. We were projecting that nuclear energy would take over as this main provider and render coal and fossil fuels and relics of the past just essentially useless, right? And this was supposed to happen by 2000, like the 2020s, right? This should have been the norm, okay? And back in the day, I want to say, what is it, like throughout the 1900s, I'm not sure the exact dates, but the governments were convinced to rush into the future. And this was really, what really helped sell this was the idea was they needed to beat Russia. And for those that don't know, we've done some monstrous things to try to beat Russia. And it's been a very, very dark road. But when it comes down to the U.S. and Russia, like both countries made huge mistakes, right? Russia also wanted to compete with the U.S. and that kind of very bad things happened for these ideas of around these ideas of also nuclear testing, nuclear weapon testing. Before, it was banned by JFK, or due to JFK's part and role, but also the idea of like nuclear plants coming up. Now, the mistakes made, they killed people. They actually killed people that were working at these plants or running these experiments and helping run these experiments. But they also ruined cities for an extremely long time. Okay, some people are like just getting back to like 2020s. They're literally just getting to back to their particular island where one hydrogen bomb test went completely wrong. But they also, the idea was that people realized like, hey, we don't want this stuff in our backyard, and eventually politicians stopped trying to sell nuclear energy to their populace, right? Now, coming back to this particular chapter in general, if you want to look at how unregulated these guys are, I think social media is really a great place to start, right? Because adults, we look at kids and we wonder why they would possibly ruin their lives on cameras for clicks and views. But we really don't understand the environment that they're growing up in, okay? Social media companies are designing their apps to be addictive and increase ad revenue, right? Move fast and break things, okay? This is the culture. Tech companies, they pay off our politicians on both sides of the aisle, so the political spotlight stays off of these weirdos, and they're made to feel even more like geniuses because they're not regulated. Nobody is coming in with people who actually know what they're doing and telling them otherwise, right? Because our politicians know that this is a source of funding, so they're going to do whatever they say in a lot of cases. And now I want you to realize just how bold a lot of these guys are, right? So besides Elon Musk, we got Mark Zuckerberg claiming that people need AI friends to help with the loneliness epidemic. Okay? He gets on camera, knowing the power that he holds in society. And he says this, right? These are not level-headed, healthy adults. They have tremendous power to influence society, and this is a tremendous problem in the making, okay? These ideas, this concept, what's happening in the tech culture, the people who are running it, it goes right back to this concept here, okay? When it comes down to AI in general, it is linked to all these things, okay? Johnny points out how the idea of cybersecurity is largely untested, but it is replacing humans in the cybersecurity field. I'm going to just go on just a wild guess, right? But the idea is, it is less money that needs to be paid out when you can replace humans with AI. So that's probably a tremendous driving force, right? Because a lot of these companies, a lot of these corporations, these owners and executives, they are giddy about the idea of firing people, and it is crazy. I recently read like this particular story where when they told about the history of clockmaking, right, and how clocks were introduced in society, clocks really, when they first came into society, they were at first introduced at a level to where like basically only the rich people had clocks, and they would literally have factory workers dependent on them. So in terms of the clocks and the time of day that they got off, and these guys just I mean, like a lot of these guys are just absolutely insane, we'll say, right? And but even when these guys started to get clocks, they actually confiscated the clocks when they first started getting clocks. And they there was like one guy who, even if they even had knowledge about like how the sun and the sky reflected based on time of day, if they had that type of knowledge, sometimes they'd just be fired outright, because then other people would be asking them, hey, how much time we got left? It's like these guys are crazy. These guys are absolutely crazy in so many different cases, and we don't even like we don't realize just how off the rails things are getting. But in terms of this idea, right, like this is in terms of Johnny, Johnny points out how really these systems are very intimately intertwined with former intelligence operatives from CIA, M15 or MI5, but apparently there's a unit 8200 from Israel that may be leading, or maybe really taking a prominent role in a lot of this stuff, which is that it's dark. It's definitely, I mean, this is it's getting, if you've been paying attention at all, it gets very crazy when you talk about how really these intelligence operation, or these intelligence agencies, are so connected, right? But Darktrace, right, that's where Johnny's main focus is here, and I must say that it's shocking to understand like how intertwined this company is to intelligence, right? Because I'm not even sure if they're trying to hide it, or no, well, actually they are, crazy enough. But the idea is they have a board stacked with people with connections or histories with various agencies, now including connections with Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, right? And you guys probably don't know this unless you've like looked at Whitney Webb's book. In terms of this sister was used during this Promise software scandal, right? And the Promise software scandal is a lot behind it, right? But essentially, this was software that was essentially that was used to give Israel backdoors to spy on American politicians, right? And what is it called? I'm just phrasing that in my own particular way, so the particular phrasing might be off, but the idea was that software had backdoors for Israel, and that software ended up in the hands of politicians, okay? Now, the idea here is that it is like when they actually did try to hide this, right? Like I said, they actually did think about like, hey, maybe we shouldn't tell people that we're actually the Alphabet Agency. And what is crazy is that they got called out. They got called out at a literal conference, and some reporter actually called them out. Thank God, which is really nice to hear that we got reporters like that. But the idea was right after this, or not right after, but after being called out, they were still able to grow in relevance and really just become a primary platform for a lot of different governments in terms of cybersecurity, or they're setting themselves up to be the primary platform. I'm not sure exactly how relevant they are in terms of the systems that other governments use, but they are becoming and spreading their influence regardless. And this is despite what we know, and this is despite what's being said about them, which is crazy, right? But I mean, this is, it's grown to the point to where a lot of these people don't find the need to hide their allegiances and aims in many cases anymore. And regardless, they're still very, very much aware. They're not completely out in the open yet, which is probably a good sign, but also it is something to watch out for. But Johnny talks about a few other entities as well, but I think a really common theme here is that they have a connection to intelligence, they're bold, and they have an overinflated sense of self-importance. That's what comes across to me when I looked at this particular, what Johnny was talking about here, okay? And I say this probably too often maybe, and probably hear about this even more, but we are for sale regarding any of the politicians that have power to change anything, right? I think I really want people to understand that. The people that have power, they are churned through a system where they accumulate drag load, whether it's gradually or all at once. However, they make sure that they accumulate drag load on their way to the top, right? All the way until a point to where the baby politicians, they may be innocent. I'll say that. They may be innocent. They may actually be decent people. Even a few people in Congress may be decent people. But when we talk about the people who have the connections, the understanding to change things, to really get let's say military assistance, some kind of military intelligence, these are people who are churned through the system, right? And this is, there's something very much, even in the, I'm reminded of just the whole Vietnam thing with My Lai. For those that don't know, it was just basically, Vietnam was essentially a clown show, and a lot of these guys who got medals were just, it makes you think about who has a medal and why they have a medal, and just the idea of, maybe checking where a person served and what happened before you say thank you for your service, honestly. Because it really is something with a lot of these guys. But when it comes down to these guys in the military, there was a culture there that allowed for this My Lai incident to take place, where essentially Vietnam, they were killing civilians and counting them as combatants if they were killed. If there's a dead person, then they're a combatant. That was it. That was the culture. And in this particular incident, I believe that was Seymour Hersh that pointed that out. But in any case, what was really found out was how after Seymour Hersh was blowing the whistle, there was no, there was a culture of, hey, we need to keep this guy covered up. And allegedly, I don't know if I have to say this, but I'll say allegedly, they tried to kill him, right? And they just, allegedly, they put bombs in his car. They did all types of, or bomb on his car, and he only got saved because somebody came in and warned him about it or something. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. But you started to realize, the people at the top, they aren't the guys who go out to beer with the guys. They're not, right? In the military, the culture of military, the people who have all those stars and everything, they accumulated those stars because they paid attention. They respected the systems of hierarchy, right? Regardless of whether, and it could have been promoted because their superior was an actual dirtbag and they didn't say anything. So eventually they would become a dirtbag, and everybody knew that they could be corrupted. So, there is a system in place that makes sure that people do certain things. If you try to disrespect that system of hierarchy and say, hey, look, this, you go outside the chain of command and say, hey, look, I've got a problem with my officer. He's telling people to kill civilians or something like that. It's kind of weird. Or people are killing civilians in front of him and he's not doing anything. Next thing you know, the guy didn't even report that you reported to him about this particular incident, right? This idea of the systems in place, it has a very real, tangible effect on what happens in society. Okay, now when it comes down to this idea of Darktrace, what it does in society, who they're able to pay off, why, even the tech bros in general, what's happening. There's a system in place that says, hey, once you pay the right people, everything else, we kind of just, we don't even know, all of those, like, what is it, the EFF or something, the privacy tech guys, they're not, those nonprofit watchdogs, we're not even gonna like listen to them. We're not gonna hold any, like, they're not even gonna make it to any platforms to really talk to people, talk to politicians. Don't even worry about it. But essentially, these people, they view us in a way to where we need to have a deeper understanding of the actual illness that is in this particular tech industry. I mean, even with the politicians, right? Or especially with the politicians. What am I talking about? Especially with the politicians, we got a problem here. And they, like, in episode 2, we discussed the Panama Papers, right? And what's funny here is why I bring this up is because politicians were just essentially platforming themselves as the people who fight corruption, or the Pandora Papers, excuse me. But with the Pandora Papers, they were literally exposed as having offshore bank accounts, offshore mansions, storing money. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy because, like, these, and when it comes down to just the corruption that exists, that's one avenue. But in terms of, even with Johnny in this particular article, Johnny talks about how these companies, they're actually platforming themselves as protectors of cyberspace. And I really can't help but wonder if the government's going to ignore all of the voices of reasons while they march us off of this cliff. Okay? When it comes down to this particular sermon, it's important that we realize that we are in the age of Aquarius, okay? And Aquarius rules over a spectrum of things. But for this segment, I want you guys to understand that Aquarius rules over artificial intelligence, okay? Now, astrologers will likely see the appeal for AI reflected in the astrological weather. But I also want to point out that Aquarius also rules over the collective and communities as a whole, okay? It rules over social movements by the collective, okay? This, in terms of this idea of what we can do, what's possible, we need to inhabit as a collective, we need to inhabit the energy of Aquarius to really put a limit on a lot of these people in a lot of cases, okay? Because if we don't inhabit that space, that energetic space, it does look like the tech bros are gearing up to do that, to exactly that. Now, There is a future segment in this particular episode that speaks to the Dragon King event, okay? And I highly recommend that you watch that as well. Now, this next segment, we're going to be referring to the book of Global Investigative Journalism Network, and the chapter in the Investigating War Crime series is going to be environmental and property damage. Okay? And our translator is Wim Z. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name or their last name. I'm not sure if it's a woman or a man. But Wim mentioned something that we've seen in preceding chapters in this book, right? And the idea is the problems of war do not magically dissipate when the weapons go away. Okay? In previous chapters, we've seen specifically how hunger and displacement are problems that can persist. Okay? But here, Wim points out how nature is a silent casualty of war. Okay? Say it with me. Nature is a silent casualty of war. Okay? Wim mentions how Agent Orange was used in the Vietnam War and shows us a picture of really this. It's hard to really look at, like, in terms of understanding that it is due to our government and our army doing this, but it's a person that was born after the war. Okay? And the victim had birth defects due to really just the Agent Orange in general. And this is a quote that really gives understanding in terms of Agent Orange, right? This is the quote, "The destruction became more sophisticated. Helicopters delivered 55-gallon drums of a chemical herbicide to us, a forerunner of Agent Orange. Within minutes after we sprayed, the plants began to turn brown and wither." Now that quote is from Colin Powell, the future chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of State. And when it comes to really the Department of Defense and the Big Five defense contractors, I feel like I can only pray that we grow to understand the monster that we're feeding, and that this monster is only waiting for its time to devour the very people who fed it. Okay? Now, Wim also mentions how the Iraqi army set fire to more than 600 oil wells in Kuwait, causing blackened skies, as well as soil and water pollution. Okay? Now, the impact on food and water supply is most apparent in terms of the result of this type of evil, honestly, but we likely don't understand the impact that it had on wildlife and the non-human species. Now, say it with me, right? Nature is a silent casualty of war. Okay? Now, the UN, for all of its problems, has acknowledged that they need to protect and do things to safeguard, and they've begun constructing a program to review post-conflict environmental review or create post-conflict environmental assessments, right? And as we talked about in previous chapters, the UN lacks teeth. It does lack teeth in a lot of ways, but here there does appear to be hope in simply shedding light in these issues. I'm more of kind of like, hey, why don't you just try to fund third-party watchdogs and help them do the job rather than you guys do it, because I've heard problematic things about the UN, and I'm not gonna go off on a tangent there, but when it comes down to this particular chapter, Wim gives us websites and applications that could be very helpful in exposing violators, but also just in general, right, in terms of actually just performing investigations, okay? Because this particular series is about investigating war crimes, right? But it's really, and you can learn a lot as just a normal civvy, but I think the idea of investigating is something that we need to understand, because we can and we are given insight into how to investigate these crimes. We're not just investigating, or we're not just looking at journalism and journals going through, okay? And when it comes down to this particular idea, in terms of what WIM's providing us in a lot of cases, he provides like journalism, particular apps for like your actual browser, or, if you're using Chrome or something like that, which is really cool. I forget the name. I think it's Wordly or something like that. But I'm gonna put something in the description for this particular segment, because I really do think you guys should take a look at it. But because he also gives access to satellite viewing platforms, and I think 1 or 2 of them may be free. I know 1 is. I'm not sure about 2. And with the rise of technology, public has really gain more access to things like this, okay? And these particular platforms that are kind of like helping us reach out and, reach more of an audience, these things really do matter. And, in terms of like, to kind of like going back to the point that the UN lacks teeth and kind of really being more firm in that regard, the perpetrators, they're not held accountable on an actual legal standing, right? That the bar is set too high to prove anything in terms of with the UN, okay? But when it comes down to the court of public opinion, there is impact and there is effect there, okay? And in terms of the bar for like just legal opinion in general, the outline, the guidance that we're looking for is into the international humanitarian law, right? And I forget the actual quotation in terms of actually how they actually outline the rights of just, I guess, nature in general. But I want to say there is overlap with environmental protections with other crimes like starvation and things like that, which are good. And I mean, honestly, people, God, this is just really zoomed in, just a level of ignorance from being just zoomed in, honestly, in terms of the actual problem and the overarching issue of being able to cause nature harm in so many different ways. But it does have impact, and there is an understanding like, hey, we can't quite do this, or these things would be, not even that we can't do it, we'd be subject to international courts if we did do this. Like I said before, I mean, the teeth on this thing or on UN are completely lacking in certain situations. But I think we really do need to understand, okay, nature is not protected, okay? And you can say it one more time with me. Nature is a silent casualty of war, okay? Now, WIM talks about 2 case studies where satellite images were used to show illegal logging after fuel prices spiked in Syria, and this is after the civil war, and also the leaking of abandoned oil tankers in Yemen, okay? So 2 cases where they exposed 2 different events. And now, going back to this idea of what WIM provides us and why I'm particularly excited about this idea is something like just developing, when we talk about the new accountability, the new systems of accountability, you can look back in episode 7, Public Records and New Systems, and that segment we talk about really just the creation of new systems, and these tools are something that definitely give insight into that, right? I definitely have some ideas that I hope to push out in the future, but we'll see how that particular thing goes. But when it comes down to something that gives even more insight, later on we talk about the Dragon King event, and just you can look at that. I think it says a lot. It does say a lot. And in this Renaissance, we have to realize that regardless of what systems that we dedicate ourselves to, our impact on the environment is going to be one of the most important metrics for how effective the system is, okay? When it comes down to communism or capitalism, our effect on the health of humans in this planet is how we'll be evaluated as a species, okay? We got this thing to where we pay for, we print this paper, we print this paper in a very specific way, and it means something, whatever. But really, when we talk about this system that we have of trying to develop ourselves, produce things, we only have the world to deal with. Even if we expand to another world, if we're known as the destroyers of certain worlds, there won't be, at some point people are going to realize, like, hey, this is actually really stupid what we're doing. We got to kind of not do this. And hopefully we learn that lesson here before Elon Musk turns before Elon Musk, launches into orbit, Earth will look like Mars. You know what I'm saying? We gotta fix this. We definitely gotta fix this. But in any case, we need to, I'm not someone on either side. I'm not on the side of communism or capitalism. But I think we really should understand things as, honestly, what works best, and stop thinking in the terms of, this side or that side. And we might end up with a new system that could possibly combine elements of both of these sides, right? But I will say that regardless, as things are today, communists appear to be winning. Right, communism appears to be winning in this idea, in this evaluation of a sect of species. And that I say that to really, really speak to avowed capitalists, hopefully, and so that maybe they can see it as their responsibility to fight corruption and help make the case for their particular system. In this segment, we reference the book of Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and the chapter is We Couldn't Avoid Him. And our translator is Samuel Brooke. Now, Brooke shows how one man is instrumental in exposing corruption in Serbia, okay? In the United States, we've heard about a figure, maybe, hopefully we've heard about him by now, but this figure named Jeffrey Epstein, right? And this may be our version of the man. I don't want to make any suggestions about his predilections towards certain things, but we're, in terms of just the idea here, follow me for a second. Now, Epstein, he had his whole PDF file stuff, right? But when it comes down to his the idea that he could have been utilizing honeypot schemes for various government agencies to trap our politicians, that's something that speaks to specifically the power system there, right? And I think what is definitely understated by really just the media in general is how connected he was in finances revolving around power, or how connected he was likely involved in finances of various powerful figures. Okay, it doesn't appear to have sunk in just how deeply entrenched entities may actually be very much reliant on this idea of a cover-up in terms of why things have lasted so long. But it does appear to remain a relevant issue nonetheless, which is good. I think it's great for our part. And now, I think we need to understand that we are being eaten alive as a populace by the depraved few. Okay? Now, say this with me. Corruption is paid by the poor. Okay? In Serbia, we got this guy named Sinisa Mali. Okay? Mali became the mayor of Belgrade out of seemingly nowhere, right? But what's funny is that he was found to have a lot of money that could not be explained by his salary. Now, when he was questioned about him having managed and owned real estate through offshore companies, he boldly stated if he owns any offshore companies or any offshore properties, the investigators who are making the claims will get the keys. Now, lo and behold, the Pandora Papers came out and he was shown to, in fact, be the owner. The investigators never got the keys, though, which is crazy. Now, and we covered some of the Pandora Papers in episode 2 of the Renaissance Sermon, and I hope you guys can certainly look back at that. But I think a common pattern was politicians who normally built platforms as figures fighting corruptions were being exposed for holding offshore money or mansions and basically just having very shady dealings. Okay, and in the U.S. specifically, we seem to suffer from really a collective corruption fatigue. Okay, but that may be really because things are still somewhat comfortable for us. Okay, we can ignore the gap in wealth that exists and is perpetuated today. Now, when the idea is that when a politician's own like offshore money or has shady like bank accounts, I mean it's Tuesday. What do you want to do? You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of how a lot of us walk around and treat it. And I think 2 countries out of all the politicians that got exposed, only 2 countries, Iceland and one other one, I forget what, but they actually overthrew their corrupt leaders, and applauds to them, I mean, for just standing up. But when it comes down to a lot of these countries, a lot of these other countries, officials that were found to have all these mansions and things, their countries, like they come from poverty-ridden countries. These people aren't just like, these people aren't just okay. They're the politicians are being paid off in various ways, probably for just the idea that citizens could now be used as slave labor in the mines or in their particular oil company or field, or basically have their lands completely stolen or whatever. Like, a lot of these people, the system that we have here in terms of they kind of make sure that the most corrupt people have the most power, those systems in these places, you can see like the effect of that is so much more apparent for these guys, and it is crazy because they're literally watching their people starve while they go on maybe like 5-month vacations. I don't know this per se, but they go on vacations to mansions, and it's absolutely insane. And You can say it with me, like, corruption is paid by the poor. Now, in Serbia, Mali was first involved with selling large companies for the government before he became a mayor of Serbia, right? And one thing that was absolutely insane was, like, literally in the middle of the night, this event happened, right? We talking about masked goons with baseball bats and bulldozers. They descended upon this community where there were people who were refusing to sell their property for this government-backed development that was happening, right? And this guy Mali, he was campaigning for it. The place was demolished, right? And later on, his ex-wife made claims that he bragged about organizing the whole thing, okay? So, despite all of this, he was promoted to the finance minister. Okay? The finance minister. Now, say it with me. Corruption is paid by the poor. Alright? Mali is friends with apparently the president of Serbia, which is something which is a figure in himself, apparently. I haven't completely looked at an article on him, but while Mali was rising, the country, like the citizens of the country, they were having their democratic powers reduced, right? And corruption has been, like, plaguing Serbia, okay? And the citizens who were, like, protesting against the conditions, like, they really amped up after kind of this event in November 24th, right? Because there was a collapse of a newly renovated train station canopy in the city of Novi Sad, right? This killed 16 people, and it became a potent symbol of corruption's deadly price. Okay? Say it with me. Corruption is paid by the poor. Now, Mali is friends with the president of Serbia. Now, while Mali was rising, this idea of what was happening, he actually maintained favor with with the president, and even though there were people a lot of people in the administration were fired. Now, this is me guessing, but I'm getting, like, the idea is, hey, maybe we can't quite keep up with this, this level of moral corruption. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is absolutely bananas. And this idea of what was happening, this guy was rewarded in a state, in a place where he was essentially, like, organizing attacks against the citizen. He was promoted, and it's crazy, like, seeing this particular, like, idea of a train, like, some kind of newly renovated train system or newly renovated train canopy just falling in, and it really does bring this idea of really what we see in America with companies, particularly like Boeing, right? Because Boeing's really being rewarded, like, various contracts, and these guys are getting money. These guys are getting taxpayer money, and they're, like, by if not all, most, if not all metrics, they're failing, right, in terms of, like, as a company, and keeping up standards and things like that, right? And I think a lot of us seem to be baffled at this clown show that's really taking place with these guys, and how whistleblowers are actually like dying at a, in parking lots or something, like it's pretty crazy. But there's a very dark suggestion behind the idea of this, like, this aircraft and aerospace giant that we know about, because Boeing is one of the big 5 defense contractors, okay? And these guys receive 1/4 to 1/3 of all of our defense contracts, okay? They're not accustomed to competitive environments where they would be forced to meet standards or even exceed standards. What we're seeing could be a symptom of this culture of the big 5 defense contractors. They are wasting a lot of taxpayer money, if you guys aren't aware. And it's really kind of a game with them. Like, hey, who can we pay with this? Whose pockets can we fill with this? It's really crazy, because they have bases close to Washington. All big 5 contractors, they have bases close to Washington, so they're able to drive and meet, whoever they need to meet. In a lot of cases, it's pretty disgusting. But this relationship that they have with politicians, like, they're going to receive money regardless of what takes place, and they are so comfortable with that Boeing is literally like it literally is a clown show with Boeing. It literally is a clown show. But I don't think there's any uproar about what's taking place, because it's just how things are. And in this chapter, like, Samuel talks about, like, particularly I think is really hopeful, is this small scrappy team of investigators that have been working to expose corruption, right? Now, I think this idea, this does give affirmation to the idea that we need to work on our own systems, right? And you can reference episode 7, Public Records and New Systems, for more information on this. But the idea here is, in this renaissance, we need to be intelligent and resourceful. Like, it seems that, this abomination that we know is really Doge is defunding everything but the actual corruption. And I believe that this idea is actually lending to what I'm about to talk about in the Dragon King event, or what's going to come up later in this particular episode called the Dragon King event, where and it turns out that really with this Doge thing, with the defunding that's taking place, a lot of independent investigations or investigative outlets and sources, they're taking a hit, because apparently our money actually went into funding some of these agencies. And I mean relying on a government to to pay you to expose any type of corruption is already kind of shaky in itself. So I'm sure that they were already trying to look for other ways to do things. But I want to say that this idea of governments and basically trying to have exert their power and their influence over people, they got a history of miscalculating how people respond, okay? And I've read cases where people develop systems to essentially become more resilient to government overreach, and in response to this particular pressure, this pressure of trying to exert power and control over a populace. And I want you guys to understand that we have very real opportunity here, right? And like I said, we'll talk about this in the Dragon King event, but we may not be able to depend on governmental systems the same way after this. Now, this is coming from the book The Marshall Project, and this chapter is Trump wants to force unhoused people into hospitals. Now, our translator is Christy Thompson. Now, it does appear that our moral and righteous president may be going to extremes to distract us from the Epstein list. Now, apparently he's issued an executive order that displays a desire to involuntarily commit more people, particularly unhoused people, to psychiatric hospitals, right? And this is, it's, the particular order is aiming to defund housing first programs and simply commit homeless people, okay? Now, the courts, they may smack this executive order down, but this particular idea, this could easily lead to, and probably will lead to, the removal of federal funding that helps poor people, and the funding of states looking to criminalize poor people, okay? Now, there are some glaring problems with this initiative that Christie highlights here, okay? The Housing First programs, they were bipartisan and large. There was a demonization of homeless people and mentally ill people, but this wasn't something that was just like a Republican initiative. Number two is the fact that this is a complete distraction from the root cause of homelessness, right? And that's the increased cost in house prices, okay? This administration is not trying to rein in BlackRock, but they are blaming its victims, okay? Number three is hospitalization is very expensive, right? A lot of us may have noticed the idea of really the insane asylum isn't really where we send people nowadays, right? And mental health systems have moved away from psychiatric hospitals due to the cost of involuntarily holding people for a long time, right? Number four makes this whole thing insane is the idea that we are experiencing historical cuts to Medicaid. So this initiative, it makes no sense, okay? Trump has the full backing of the Republican Party here, but I keep seeing signs that this guy is actually more closely related to the polar opposite to JFK, okay? And this whole administration, this feels like a deep state sanctioned liquidation, okay? And we'll talk more about this in the Dragon event section, or the Dragon King scenario. But in this renaissance, we have to stop blaming drug addicts and poor people, okay? I think a good analogy is really provided to us by a Canadian psychologist named Bruce Alexander, okay? And Bruce decided to challenge an experiment that essentially was depicting how impossible it was for rats to fight drug addiction, okay? So in this commercial that was aired live, a rat was shown to be in a cage drinking from cocaine-laced water over regular water, and there was a voice in the background and with an ominous tone talking about how the rat would continue to choose cocaine water until it starved to death. and that I mean that was used for all time. The experiment that really that commercial was based on was used to justify just all type of things that were just honestly just misguided, we'll say. And in this, like, what Bruce did was he developed an experiment where the same options were given regarding the water for the rat, right? So one was drug laced and one wasn't. I think in his particular experiment he used morphine laced water, but I think the other experiment may have used cocaine. I don't know what the particular thing was there, but the idea was he had the control experiment where that they used in the commercial, and he designed another experiment or another environment, right? So with the one in the commercial, the rat was in a cage. Very simple, very straightforward. In this experiment that he added on, or the environment that he added on, right? The corresponding scenario he created was something called really Rat Park, right? And what he did was he created this environment where rats had access to food, toys, and other rat companions. And in this particular experiment, in this particular environment, the rats largely ignored the drug-laced water in the second environment. In the first environment, they actually drunk from the drug-laced water, and I'm not sure the fate of the rats, but the idea here was the environment was key, was very instrumental to this change in behavior for the rats. And we got to stop trying to really find band-aids to cover up the fact that this society is built to create sick people, both literally and metaphorically. Okay? And another example that I've heard before was the idea that libraries in Greece were really developed to assert the prestige of a society. Okay, public libraries, and the idea being, look at what our society can provide its people. And being the quote-unquote richest country in the world, or close to now, we need to rethink what we're providing our people. We need to very much rethink that. And this is something that I think we can kind of really view as instrumental to the idea of the Foundry in general. So anyone that is interested in developing new systems, regardless of whether you completely agree with the concepts involved, integrated into the Foundry, just showing and looking at the particular system may spark some ideas for your particular ideas. But I encourage everyone to think of any systems, even if they don't agree with the Foundry in that particular concept. This segment, we're going to be referring to the book of Stanford Social Innovation Review, chapter Grappling with Systems Collapse, and our translators are Liz Rudy, Tom Glacier, and Rachel Reichenbach. Okay. This chapter talks about social change in organizations in a system or a society that may no longer be valuable, right? So this idea of like social change in organizations, kind of don't think that captures really the accurate description for what's discussed here, but it does get in terms of actually the giving the accurate emotional response to this particular idea here. But we'll talk more about it regardless. And we in terms of this idea, this concept, I think it speaks to societal collapse. And I definitely think we need to start to consider at least the possibility here, right? And explore it, right? Taking steps to think out what you would do, and what that would mean for you, your community, and your actual family, right? And there's a book that I think really speaks to this topic of actually like the power of envisioning this idea and this event is imaginable. Okay. In this book, Jane McGonigal, and Jane's a director of game research and development, and in this book she talks about particularly some telling experiments and some telling projects that she's been a part of, and for this particular idea, I really think it's pertinent to mention how in 2010 she exposed a lot of participants in a certain experiment to pressures that were very similar to the COVID pandemic. Okay, for all my conspiracy theorists out there, I don't know if Fauci was there. I can't say that for sure, but I will say I feel like Jane definitely has a sense of credibility I would attribute to her based on no real understanding of who she is. But I like her. I like the book. But I will say, after the pandemic, her team took this opportunity and reached out to the past participants for interviews and to see how they handled the pandemic, the actual pandemic. And it was found that they were much quicker to respond and more resilient to the changes that COVID required people to really get used to. And this idea, the power of actually just walking through even just a tad bit, like you don't even have to completely immerse yourself in the scenario, but starting to walk through and understand those things, what you would do, what it would require, that does give you an element of real power in the future. So let's see, in terms of this idea, right, our translators here note how the underappreciation of the moment could be disastrous for organizations and honestly I feel like society as a whole, right? Because the Dragon King event describes a shock that may very well tear the system apart and render it useless for the future, right? And our translators talk about a systemic understanding around understanding the collapse in general, okay? And what to expect in terms of the organizations and the systems that are in place, okay? And we won't dive deep in here because I feel like there's all types of trouble I could get into here. I don't even know if there's any type of trap holes, but starting to think about that is extremely important. And this is a quote straight from the particular reading, right? The Three Horizons framework, originally developed by McKinsey and Company, but since reimagined by Bill Sharp and others in the Futures and Foresight community, provides a helpful way to understand this dynamic. The collapsing system, essentially Horizon 1, which is shown in green, its descent into non-viability, steepening dramatically after a Dragon King event. Horizon 2, in orange, represents the intermediary period, marked by chaos and uncertainty, but also experimentation and the stress testing of nascent norms and institutions. Horizon 3, in purple, is the system that eventually emerges, and perhaps reflecting some aspects of Horizon 1 and Horizon 2, but ultimately different in its attributes, behaviors, and outcomes. Okay? Now, the translators, they talk about how attempts to preserve or return to normal could prolong the period of chaos and uncertainty, which is shown in orange. But I also think the reactionary response that many of us may be more easily guided to, it would play into the hands of characters who are planning for the collapse. Okay? And this is pure speculation at this point, right? This is hypotheticals. We're just talking. Now, I think a lot of us are in shock by many things being done by this administration, but I want to point out that really this idea of what's going on and how it's taking place, it does appear to be sanctioned by the deep state. Okay? And we could be looking at a liquidation. Okay? In terms of this graph, there could already be a design ready for Horizon 3 or the purple line. And I must say, I don't think that we would like it. Now, they talk about different systems of collective action and how they can impact this particular idea, the network shown here, or the graph shown here, basically, right? And one is essentially a protective system that may be closely aligned with mutual aid groups, right? This system can speed up a more appealing emerging system or a different Horizon 3, which is shown in purple. Okay? Now, this could, like, in terms of people who don't understand what actual mutual aid groups are, it's essentially just groups of people, communities organizing and creating systems already, right? So these people would essentially be more resilient in scenarios like a Dragon King event, but also more willing to understand and be moving into a Horizon 3 rather than trying to uphold a failing system. Number 2 is a blocking system, which they describe as a collective stubbornness that will slow down the collapse of Horizon 1 in green here, but also it would help the rise of essentially or it may help the rise of more appealing systems or slow down the rise of less appealing systems. Okay, that depends on the resistance, of course. Okay, and this is essentially just not being obedient. Okay, so not necessarily just going along with the flow. And you can obviously see how that would slow down Horizon 3. And this is the third system they talk about is a disruptive system. And this can be described as really a collective protest. And given the organizing nature behind protest, it may help create an emerging system built around the wants and needs of the majority. Okay? You get together. In a protest, you have to organize. When you organize, you're already talking amongst each other, the people around you, the neighbors. The understanding, the collective, already kind of starts to have they already start to kind of build the Horizon 3 unconsciously. So we have that. But now, the last one, which is a creative system. It sounds a lot like the Foundry, okay? And it's built around the just imagination and designing of an appealing system that can even be more appealing than the collapsing system as a whole. And this is something that we understand that society's failing I don't think people are willing to push back on the idea that we live in a sick society. We need a new system regardless. Okay? And that is something that we should certainly start to grow to understand. Okay? And that's very much the spirit that I really started to design the Foundry in. So even, like I said, even if you just look at the Foundry and pick from it what you like and what you don't like, or if you just want to kind of have conversations about creating your own system, I'd totally be open and willing to do that, depending on just how much I got going on at the moment. Okay. Now, also, I think we should be aware of this, the increase in possibility that we're looking at today, right? Because I've seen just a few things just now now definitely things are kind of definitely going off the rails, but I've been seeing things build up to this moment in general, right? There's a few things I want to mention here. One, politicians caring very little about how they are perceived by the public. Okay? This is coming from the idea of Epstein, the Epstein case, and with Gaza and Israel. Okay? Two is I've seen, particularly this is something that I haven't seen in the media, but the rise of private military contractors and their use. Okay? Our army is subbing out a lot of military action already. I'm not going to speak too much to this, but that idea is very worrisome. Okay? Now, also included in number 2 is there's a growing divide between the citizens and the soldiers or the actual military itself, right? We have a tremendous gap in understanding our civilians understanding the soldiers, right? But also just understanding how we're guided in our morality when we take action versus how our country is guided. It is insane, and that goes back to the element of just, I guess, Gaza in general. But kind of starts to speak to that like a little bit, I'll say. And for number 2, there's an increase in military budget, right? This is despite the clown show that Doge was. They decided to increase the military budget. That's anybody who had really an understanding and a deep appreciation for how Elon Musk was taking on the system and going out his way to fire all the people who were regulating him and the park rangers or whatever. I don't know. I recently kind of had a touch the grass moment where people started to where I kind of talked to people who believed what Elon was doing was okay, and that maybe it was just the Democrats that were just being loud about this. But that increase in the military budget was a straight huck to a spit in your face. That was when we're talking about corruption, corroding a system that's corroding. The Department of Defense, they give our money to the 1/4 to 30% of our defense, but of the contracts they give out go to the same 5 defense contractors. Those same 5 defense contractors are have homes in Washington, right? The corruption is so, for anyone who knows, it is so in your face. It is absolutely disrespectful. But that rise in military budget was a spit in the face, and I want you guys to understand that. Also the idea of the insane wealth inequality. It's getting out of hand. It's getting completely out of hand, especially when you think about the rise of private military and contracts and what that could essentially lead to. Also, the rise of private equity and BlackRock. They are literally devouring towns. It is not like they are able to, right? It's like they don't have any real regulations or meaningful regulations to worry about in a lot of cases. They're just doing it, and it is disgusting what they're able to do. Check out More Perfect Union, and just private equity in general. And this idea of Palantir and the weird tech bros, right, and Doge in general, but Palantir getting this power, I want you guys to understand something. The FBI got a lot of power under J. Edgar Hoover. They didn't have to disclose that. That was not disclosed to the public when they increased the power of their surveillance system, right? They don't have to necessarily, like, we hear about things and it disappears in the news, but those things are very like those things have those things continue in terms of how they live and what they do. And in this renaissance, I think we need to at least contemplate this idea of societal collapse and loosen our reliance on really a government, particularly when they're just allowing the quote-unquote world's richest man to buy the president. And I say quote-unquote because I'm just like, the more seasoned, really rich people, they're going to know how to hide their money in foundations and, different nonprofits or whatever. They know how to get around certain things like taxes. Elon Musk might be just he new to the top 10 Forbes list and really view that as some kind of status symbol or something, but he doesn't. I don't think he really understands a lot about how this idea works, but he does have friends. He has friends that definitely understand power. They don't, and they understand that when you get to a certain level of wealth, power shouldn't be seen. Like, that's the concept. Very, very different. But in any way, this guy going to quote-unquote buy the president and cosplay as an elected official and fire government workers while he's pretending to fight corruption, that's, if you're a government worker that was fired, you should view your country betrayed you. That's what happened. That's what that was. That was a betrayal. It was a bipartisan betrayal. That was not, oh my God, the Republicans, they don't even care. No. That was bipartisan. That was a betrayal. Like, that was the safeguards to keep you employed and doing your job. You need to understand something. That is government. That was a systemic understanding that these people could be fired. There were no safeguards. There was no military to come and just smack some sense, and some Seymour Hersh figure to come in and smack Elon Musk and say, "Hey, stop this." There was none of that. These things just happened. This was a betrayal by your government, your system. Trying to go back and revive the system may not be worth it, especially when we look at what happened in Gaza in general. It's a very disgusting system that we have in place, and it may not be fixable. But at the very least, we need to think about what happens if it does collapse and what we would do. And like I said, even if you don't agree with the Foundry concept, I'm going to invite you to take a look at it, and also subscribe to my Substack, where you have the option to also get my paywalled articles around the Foundry research and development section. Okay, I think that I'm non-biased, but I think those are the best articles ever written, ever. So for this next segment, we're going to be looking at the Book of Cities Forum under the chapter of Superblock, Barcelona, a city redefined. And our translator here is Ronica Posteria. I might be mispronouncing that. But in terms of this particular concept here, Renika talks about organizing and how to organize cities around this concept of superblocks. And it reminds me of the Foundry and of just so many different ways, but one of the main features of the superblock that I haven't really talked about in terms of the actual ebook for the Foundry, or the actual video itself, it's talking about restricting personal vehicles in large portions of the city. And I want anybody who just had the impulse to really just kind of cringe at that idea to just take a moment and really think with me, because I had the same impulse when I first came into this concept of actually restricting the use of personal vehicles. But you should understand that large portions of our cities right now, they're designed to just basically as storage for personal vehicles. And when it comes down to what we can do in terms of what we can do with actual cities and city design, this is putting a real strain on that. It's a very real limitation. Parking and just the expectations for traffic moving through a city, these are things that a designer can't ignore in any way, right? Or a city planner. They have to think these things out, and we take it for granted. We really do. But this idea, it's not necessarily, you'd be surprised about how intertwined this idea of our like personal freedom being connected to, this idea of a personal vehicle has to do with the, kind of the lobbying that takes place in a lot of really cities in general, right? Because and just to give you guys an idea, when it came down to it was I think this was from Dark Money by Jane Meyer. She talked about really just how the Koch brothers, they were essentially they essentially co-opted the Republican Party by basically coupling the idea for oil companies that were just they were just responsible for just essentially just destroying the actual like environment in a lot of different ways, but also destroying their people and just not paying their people and subjecting them to all types of things. But they coupled this idea for their business with government overreach, thereby coupling it with the idea of gun restrictions, right? And I think we're kind of seeing this idea now in terms of how we kind of view personal cars. It reminds me of that particular manipulation that took place there, because I'm most certainly like I guess what just to give you guys an understanding, like I'm all for like things like universal health care, and I can make a legitimate case. I could probably take time to do that, but I'm for things very similar to that in terms of actually like reforming a lot of society in a lot of ways. But I'm also pro gun use, right? I don't see those things as really conflictory in any way, right? I don't see that. I there is no real like just conflictory nature to these things when you really start to dig in, honestly, when it comes down to the ideas of really placing these categories into things and making them natural enemies of each other is crazy. But I want you guys to really think about that. I want you guys to really, really try to understand this idea of what are personal vehicles? What do we use them for? Why are they so prevalent throughout society, and who are they really benefiting? Especially when we talk about going into a city, the idea of like the traffic that we have to face in a lot of cases, it's insane. It is like actually insane, right? the way you can move through a city, the amount of time it takes to move from one place to another, we can do a lot better without cars. When it comes down to the real efficiency of actual just vehicles in general, just public transportation like buses, trains, things like that, those are where you get your bang for buck. And we kind of have some pretty serious situations like around basically the roadblocks that would take for us to get from where we're at now to where we want to go. But we essentially will have to silence the vehicle lobbyists and the fossil fuel lobbyists in a lot of cases, because we won't need nearly as much of either when it comes down to this concept. And that reformation that takes place, corporations may take a hit there, or they definitely will. And I don't really have a tremendous amount of empathy for the guy who can't afford his third yacht. That's not me particularly, but if that's you, by all means, you do the best you can. Your mindset, maybe you'll become a billionaire like the 3,500 that are enjoying the 3,500 billionaires that are out there today. In any case, what in terms of this right here, this idea of just silencing the vehicle lobby, it has to be something that we can do in terms of making this particular idea possible, but also just in terms of when it comes down to the foundry in general and restricting personal vehicle use in certain areas, that encourages a level of it encourages people to really slow down, interact with one another, but it also encourages people to do things like walking and shopping more, spending more time in the area. It encourages way more interaction with the individuals that are really that use the city and the actual city itself, right? It's very much something that we need to understand, and we really do need to grapple with in terms of how cities need to look. And this is kind of the backbone when we talk about this particular chapter here, right? When we talk about superblocks in general in Barcelona, we're talking about just transforming a city in terms of just, they use superblocks. I'm not quite sold on that concept in terms of, I'm more of a reuse type of guy. I don't think we need to, I would try to be more resourceful with what's already there. I would assume in terms of actually going in like they went in with the park in New York, even though that's beautiful. I think it's nice, but I don't think we want that particular heavy-handedness with this, and we want to be like I said, be resourceful. We don't see the real cost of the building materials that we use, right? We see what's happening today. We see the cost in terms of the monetary value of tearing down a project versus this versus that. The way they kind of value a project and decide based on a budget sheet, it seems very much like it's planned out, like it's one of the highest intellectual things to do in terms of actually evaluating a project. And there is value there, but when it comes down to when we zoom out in terms of what we're doing when we decide to simply tear down a project and rather than reuse, we do, I would say we have a lot to think about there. And this is, I am very much happy with this idea of simply reevaluating this particular idea and this concept of a city and what it means in terms of what you want to do here. But when it comes down to like recovering this particular space, right? The reason why this idea, the restriction of personal vehicles, it allows for so much room, or what they do with that room that it really does provide, is they really do look to give that space back to the community, right? They're working on all kinds of different projects that it will look like a genuine, if you're looking from the top down view, it does look beautiful. It does look like in terms of the way they actually lay the nature out in general, and you know, the parks, and kind of weave the parks in through the city in ways that they couldn't do it the same way if they didn't have a kind of a limitation on personal vehicles. But you know, of course, they're still going to let utility vehicles through. They're still going to let work trucks through, in terms of not the personal work trucks, but certain work trucks. And of course, there's going to have to be something worked out when it comes down to contractors and how they get materials to a job, which could actually work in the contractor's favor in a lot of cases. But I'm going off the rails a little bit, right? But when it comes down to this idea, this is how we become this is how we take a really significant step towards really becoming good neighbors with our fellow species, I would say, right? So whether that be plants or other animals in general, we kind of had that space. We had that space start to form. And this is they talk in this particular chapter about all types of things, like in terms of actually what this particular city, you know, what it looks like in terms of the regulations, what the roadblocks were in terms of like actual, you know, when it comes down to, you know, going to a block and saying, hey, we want to put this particular thing up here, and you're not looking. That's my thing. Like I hate the idea of not looking at what's there and not evaluating the plan based off of what's there. And, you know, like you can't just in my particular idea of the foundry, is it's meant to be molded to adapt to the actual environment that's there now. Okay, so that's the idea that I would have for the foundry. That's the concept that I would take. And of course, when it comes down to opportunities and strips of land, where we talk about, you know, possibly restricting the use of vehicles, that's definitely something that's interesting, right? And I want, like, when it comes down to just the foundry in general, this is like this particular segment, it's not going to be comprehensive over this concept of a super block or this particular article in general, right? Like I said, there's a few things in here, but when it comes down to the foundry in general, I want this more so to be kind of speak to what I'm trying to kind of put out there, because the idea here is that we want a single contract that people can sign, and we have identified who signs this document and how this goes and pay, you know, and basically lays over. We don't want politics, you know, politicians playing that game. We just want to basically say, hey, look, if you sign it, then you are pro foundry. If you decide the hum and haw, then hey, like that's, you're not foundry. That's cool until you sign the document. And I don't want there to be an element of wiggle room. And of course, because when it comes down to the concept, I don't really like the idea of give and take, in terms of with this idea of playing with at least under the name of the foundry, right? Like, you can call it whatever you want. Don't call it the foundry when it comes down to you playing politics, right? That's the idea. Like, oh, we're just trying to, you know, do things the we're just trying to politics, everything's politics. Like, yeah, that's nice, whatever. Like, I'm not gonna like play corruption here so I can get what I want there. You dirt, like, let me chill. But when it when it comes down to this idea of actually putting the contract in front of someone, you'll see exactly who they are, what kind of interest that they maybe have accrued when they don't sign that document. And the people, most importantly, will know the document and will see the politician hum and haw and decide, say, hey, look, I just got to review something. That's the concept here, right? When you're pro Foundry, you are essentially pro the idea of that, the ideas that come with the Foundry. I don't want to go off on that tangent there, but one thing that's really instrumental to the Foundry is the idea of zoning, right? Just to give you an idea, Disney has its own zoning parameters and its own police and stuff like that. I'm not sure if it's gonna look exactly like that, but when it comes down to the concept of zoning in general and what we do and what we're able to do, I do want a zone that is able to restrict personal vehicles at certain points, utilize the systems of affordable living, like co-living, for example, and kind of like more like communal spaces, businesses, or whatever. And that's another tangent. Okay, so I also want to control ad space, and the idea here is they actually talk about this, and I talk about this in the article that's paywalled, so I'm not gonna go on that tangent. I was really close. I was close. But the idea here of this also special business and tax incentives to allow for just to basically give more incentive to locals doing things. There's a specific idea of just there's a environment of people that I want people to experiment with businesses and also have a platform to potentially gain customers for their particular businesses. Okay, and I want to promote that more. Okay, so like for instance, like we all know like that the lady that can cook, or the person that can cook, they're like they can, that's just, they got the best. It doesn't even, like, no restaurant can touch that, what they're able to do. But for some reason they don't have like a restaurant. They're not like platform to they're not promoted in that particular way. They're just saying like, oh, they just know how to cook. And that's a shame. We should have something for that. Or I'm gonna go off on a tangent. I'm gonna go off on a tangent right there. I'm not gonna I'm gonna keep this grounded. But that's one idea for the specialized business and tax incentives, in terms of actually allowing for those particular things, that environment of experimentation and gaining customers and marketing and stuff like that for the local community. I will say this, when it comes down to ad space in general, and because this kind of tags in here, we don't have an we don't carry I won't even say society. We don't carry really an understanding of, I would say, the energetic environment to put the real, that really shows and is more accurately able to define the value of ad space in a place, right? Because when it comes down to being subjected to particular ads, we all, or not we all, but a lot of us may have seen the idea of images flashing in front of a person's face and them being subconsciously affected in some particular way. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here. That idea of thinking that you can put ads everywhere and think that there is no impact or effect besides just kind of just this piece of paper in the air, or this billboard in the sky, and it's like, hey, these people are giving me X amount of dollars. This is nice, like it. sounds great. It sounds excellent. But when it comes down to what we're trying to do here, what needs to be done, it's not something that's going to allow for easily, and at least as easily, like the idea of billboard space in general. And this is me like pulling my teeth to even say not as easily, because I just want it all out restricted in some cases, but I do realize there may be an element of give and take here that I'll have to kind of do, and it'll only be for something that is going to be healthy to the actual environment. I don't I've had people talk to me about like certain ideas, and it's just like, what? I'm not gonna just add these things because they'll give us money and they'll make this more whatever. It's not. There's a certain elements to this. I'm going off on a tangent again, but when it comes down to also like licensing certain businesses to have 24/7 operation, I don't like what happened with the COVID shutdowns. I am not with that. I'm sorry if for anybody that's listening that thinks like, oh my goodness, like you're an anti-vaxxer or something. I don't really like. That's not. When it comes down to what's been revealed so far and who's paid for what's been revealed, there has been no real evaluation. There's been no serious evaluation. RFK is a joke. When it comes down to the idea of what is happening, though, we should understand that there should be a 24/7 open place, right? I'm remembering like this idea of Waffle House. I'm from Atlanta, and we used to like go to Waffle House. But someone said that like, and Waffle House is always like open 24/7, right? That's just the thing. And you know, the cook, they're just like smoking a cigarette out front or something usually. And it's not it's a controversial environment sometimes in terms of like just how it kind of ends up. But when it comes down to what it does, being there, being open, that is powerful, right? To have that in a community, and we need that. We absolutely need that, and that doesn't need to, like the idea that governments can go in and say, oh no, you have to close everything down. We want everyone safe. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. No, you know, I'm not gonna do it, or I just can't. I can't. I'll say it needs to be. I won't say I'm not gonna do it. I'm not going to. I'm not going to I'm not going to really expose the zoning to basically government overreach in that particular way in terms of controlling the idea of, oh, this place can't be open because it's not an essential business. Like, yeah, no, it's essential. And when we think about 24/7 operation, first off, nightlife in the Foundry is gonna be crazy. Back to the segment, I'm not gonna go off the rails here, but when it comes down to creative lives in general, they don't operate 9 to 5. They don't operate in 6 to 9. They don't operate in the normal business operations. When it comes down to a society when it comes down to an energetic environment that produces and that incentivizes Renaissance people, they won't be subject to this idea. So that's just something that is going to have to be in there in terms of the idea of 27 operation, having a place that people in the community know they can always go to. And also this idea of licensing residents to grow and sell produce. It's very important to me. It's very important, and I think it's I say to me, but the idea is that I want that to essentially grow into something to where like essentially networks are formed. I spoke to a friend, and I spoke to a friend who had kind of a nonprofit in the food industry or whatever, but he spoke about basically his state allowed him to essentially use individual properties and label them under him as a farm, as a single farm, and a producer of produce for the actual place. So that's something that that's something that I think needs to be actually incorporated in the idea of the zoning for the foundry. When you have an individual property and you have, let's say, landscapers, that I really like the idea of basically like landscapers that are more specialized, right? So we take the landscapers that we have now and give them the option to specialize even more and enter into the program to where they can upkeep these particular places and help, these particular individual properties become a part of the foundry farm, we'll call it, right, or something like that, right? And that was pretty big and that was pretty huge. But this place in general, right? So these are some ideas, and in terms of for the zoning that controls it. A lot not said there, and we're gonna what is it called? I don't even restrict ourselves in terms of actually going off the rails with the explanation. But when it comes down to the foundry itself, there's a lot of, there's I'm not gonna be completely just like absolutely rigid and stern on all the issues, but there are things that I won't budge on, right? I'm not gonna take corruption in one place so people see the foundry and think, oh, okay, well, this is another politician's ploy to get like a piece of, to piecemeal us like real a real renaissance. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not gonna be it. And I'm sorry, I can't allow that to while the foundry is something that I have power over in any way, shape, or form. That's not something that I can really say that I can do and have a good conscience, because the idea is that when people see the foundry, when they see the foundry's construction, there's a understanding that people need to have, right? And that understanding is that finis corruptionis, and the idea is that means the end of corruption. So this idea of the foundry, it has to be linked to that. There can't really be too much wiggle room, and it has to combat the ills of society. It has to. We can't piecemeal a lot of this stuff. We can't budge on a lot of this stuff, right? And I completely understand that we have to live in this particular system and environment, but there's not gonna we're not gonna I don't care who has who on camera doing what. I don't care who had whatever compromise you got on you as a politician. That doesn't even matter to me. I don't care what kind of interest you hold. I don't care who's your lobbyist. Sign the contract or don't sign the contract, and then we'll let the people know if you signed or not. That's it. That's the only conversation that we want to talk about. And there's another concept when it comes down to projects like this. If this is something that you're kind of really into, there's an idea and the concept that I got from a particular book. I think it's In the Mouth of the Wolf. It's about a particular journalist in Mexico, and the journalist unfortunately ended up basically, allegedly being murdered. But she was a really good journalist, and she had a really good a really good system. And one of the things that she made to do, or she really made a point to do, was not have off the record conversations with politicians. And that's very important, and that is something that I think a lot of us may need to carry with us when we come down, because we're seeing a lot. Like, we're having kind of a come to realization moment with a lot of these podcast bros right now, in terms of the way they're kind of coping about the the moral uprightness of our current administration in so many different ways, which is hilarious. But it does speak to that idea. Don't try to, like, when someone holds power, when you don't want friends that will prevent you from punching up to power. You don't want that. Those aren't the people, like, you don't want those friends. And if you ever get a platform, make sure that you understand they only want to talk to you because of your platform. They only want to talk. That's literally the only reason they could possibly want to talk to you. Like, they're not just seeing you like, oh my god, you're like so interested. Like, yeah, okay, great. Just, I mean, like all right, okay, this is getting long. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Just try to, like, understand those things in general. And like I said, if you take what's useful, discard what's not. And if you got this idea of how to do certain things, use it in a certain way. But if you're a scumbag, I'm gonna call you out. Like, if you're, like, using concepts just to make enough room for your corruption, I mean, I'm gonna call you out. And I'm gonna take it personally if I see the concepts within the Foundry. Was it Peter Thiel and Alex Carpenter Palantir or whatever? They're calling something the Foundry. I'm like, yeah, that's personal, buddy. That is personal now. Like, I already didn't like y'all, like, with a very deep disgust for you guys in general, but now it's just like, okay, this is absolutely my Foundry or your Foundry. There is no and.
Where those who perceive truth may strive to make others see.
Big, powerful America, and shoot them for what?
On that continent, we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other.
With the last words on my lips, that I am a revolutionary, and you're gonna have to keep on saying that.
They say sunlight is the best disinfectant.
It just seems like we're at the point with technology where the physical and the digital worlds should really be fully blended. And that's what the holographic overlays allow you to do.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would,
this is a long hesitation.
I think the primary cause of death to Palestinians. Okay, do you want to hear the answer, or do you want to yell? Well, you don't want to hear an answer? Obviously. So the primary source of death in Palestine is the fact that Hamas has realized that there are millions and millions of useful idiots.
All right, but we set up Doge. Yes. How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Yes.
People use it, young people especially, like, use it as a therapist, a life coach, having these relationship problems. What should I do? And right now, if you talk to a therapist or a lawyer or a doctor about those problems, there's, like, legal privilege for it. There's doctor-patient confidentiality, there's legal confidentiality, whatever. And we haven't figured that out yet for when you talk to ChatGPT.
Joining us now is Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan. Senator, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So, why don't you answer that question? Like, why is this now is the time that you do care?
Yeah,
Just not
obviously,
particularly care.
It's horrible when you have a pedophile and someone who had a literal pyramid scheme of recruiting 14 and 15-year-old girls.
Virginia says they're as young as 12, and there's another report that they're 11 and 12. But then I know of other people I know of therapists who have counseled Epstein victims, and we can get into that later. And actually, a lot of those victims a number of those victims were under the age of 10.
at the time, I mean, I sort of saw it as like one of these horrible stories that comes out every 5 months, you know, about somebody. I think the Weinstein thing had happened. There weren't Michiganders, to my knowledge, who were involved, you know, women, young girls who were involved. So I kind of saw it as like a horrible moment, but not particularly something that's like going to decide whether someone in my state can buy a house or get a good job.
We need to understand that we are being eaten alive as a populace by the depraved few.
So Apollo comes in, they buy this smelter, they promise that they're going to do right by the 2,500 families whose, you know, workers are there. And they immediately load it up with debt. This was a company that did not have a lot of debt. And so it didn't have enormous interest costs. It didn't have to pay those costs.
I just want to ask, when they load it up with debt, do they say, okay, these are our assets, and they put the assets, that's how they can get the debt because they're putting the assets up as collateral?
Correct. So the asset is this smelter and this huge infrastructure. And they also had a very low cost of electricity.
Just to interrupt again, is the debt used to pay for the acquisition?
Yes. The debt is used to pay for the acquisition, but it again allows the private equity firm to take the money out, right? They're loading the debt onto the company itself, not onto the private equity firm. So the company is the one that now has to struggle with the debt costs, the increased interest expense that's associated with the debt. So Noranda, they load it up with debt. Almost immediately, Apollo gets its money out, all of its money out.
Which it wasn't that much.
Wasn't that much. Maybe even like 6 months or something like that. They were able to extract all their money by putting the debt on the company, okay? So now Noranda is struggling under debt, under this debt load. Apollo then raises more debt. They ultimately make 3 times their money on the Noranda purchase. Meanwhile, the company starts to struggle,
and it
not
goes up,
surprisingly.
it goes under because it has to service the debt now.
It starts to struggle because it has to service the debt. So then Apollo says, wow, this is a problem. We need to negotiate with the state of Missouri's utility commission to lower our electricity costs, or otherwise we're going to leave. We're going to sell the company, take it somewhere else or something. So they negotiate with the utility commission a lower rate, even though it means that the other ratepayers in Missouri have to pick up the slack, have to cover that difference. Apollo gets the lower rate. It then starts to fire people because it can't make ends meet. The company is struggling. Again, the debt is too high.
Corruption is paid for by the poor.
And he said, well, once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht. It's a beautiful yacht and it's a beautiful day and you can have anything you want on that yacht. But if you decide to get off that yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. Media refuses to talk about it, which I find kind of mind-boggling because it's so obvious. There was a Tennessee representative, U.S. representative named Tim Burchett, came out about 1.5 years ago and said, my colleagues are being compromised in honey traps.
Do you think AIPAC should register as a foreign lobby?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that I know plenty of people who think they should. You know, I don't.
It's kind of a cop-out answer, don't you think?
I mean, yeah. I literally, I just guess I'd have to look at the definition. I certainly have had my tough moments with that organization. And
so you stop accepting their funding?
You gotta get your facts straight. I have not been endorsed by AIPAC. I have not, I'm sorry. I was the first Jew elected to the Senate that was not endorsed by any Jewish group. AIPAC, J Street.
You've been the recipient of their funds.
In 2018, when I first ran, people who were members, yes.
and forgive me if this is impolite, like, I'm curious why you wanted to talk to us.
What do you mean?
Well, like,
yeah.
we don't have actually a lot of senators, especially ones who have very different ideology than us, reach out. So I'm curious what your goal was and why you thought to come here.
You know, one of the most powerful descriptions I've heard of the actual CIA is the idea of it being a secret society in the government, within the government, that has the ability to act independent of the morals that may restrict us in keeping up with countries like China and Russia. Okay? I want people to understand MK Ultra was a very real thing that took place. CIA agents would drug coworkers and random people. One guy ended up abusing and killing a small kid after he was drugged. An officer ended up robbing a store, and it obviously ruined lives. One of the whistleblowers ended up dead. The family was left without answers and, dare I say, without real justice in any way. Seymour Hersh turned the CIA down when they tried to recruit him to kill leaders in a foreign country and staged the scene as if someone within that foreign country or another group within that foreign country actually did the deed. The idea was that they wanted to really create disruption in these particular places and have these people fight each other and make it easier to get what they wanted to get done. They have been known for staging coups, providing weapons, funding, and resources to very controversial entities within those particular countries. Okay? When we talk about those themes of astroturfing, burying caches of weapons, money, these are a lot of the tactics that were used. And Alan Dulles was the head of the CIA and helped mold it in a lot of different ways, and I don't think people really understand. He was a finance guy, right? He aligned much of the CIA's efforts into, benefit the financial entities that he was tied to. When it comes down to the networks, there was a what was it called? The Devil's Chessboard by the Devil's Chessboard. And I'm gonna give this disclaimer, and I'm gonna let you take it however you will. The CIA has denied all of this, or denied this book and denounced this book. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. It's a serious matter, but the CIA has denounced this book. But Alan Dulles, according to this book, Alan Dulles went to basically Europe and created a network that was independent from the actual network in the, from the actual network that the U.S. knew about, that the president knew about, right? He very much had his own. It very much did sound like a secret society that Alan Dulles decided to build. Some people believe that he was connected to the assassination of JFK. This idea, I think, really helps you understand just how off the rails Alan Dulles was. He would be very bold in trying to get just top-ranking Nazi officials out of punishment, out of the Nuremberg trials. He would do that, and these guys were these guys were just, they didn't care. They didn't care in a lot of cases, and they felt like just entitled to whatever they got in a lot of cases. It was crazy. And he was bold about this in terms of, or he wasn't, I won't say that he was bold, I'll say that it was bold, his actions were bold, right? Because Alan Dulles wasn't really like, he wasn't, a lot of these top figures that create these intelligence networks and everything, they're really, they are very much not on the front lines of being spies. They're not, known for sticking their personal necks out. They just basically know how to create, systems to where they can shake hands with the killer, or with the, with the person of that will actually do any deed that they need done. And that's another important thing. Like, a lot of these guys at the top of these agencies, they're not known for going out. They're not going out to beer with the guys after work. They're not doing any of that. It's just they're just using everyone to get what they want and the power that they want. And it's pretty disgusting when you really think about it. Now, I think when it comes down to what we're seeing today, the idea of sunlight being a disinfectant for a lot of these guys, I think it's excellent that these guys think that, hey, let's go out and and influence the public. In your CIA, I'm like, yeah, please tell us more about what the CIA wants us to know. Like, what? It's hilarious. But I want you guys to understand something. Edward Snowden, just to get a real grip on the culture right now, Edward Snowden is still wanted for espionage in the U.S. He's still receiving refuge from, quote unquote, our enemy, Russia, right? But if you go through and you ask any number of people throughout the streets, they will likely, unless you're in Washington, D.C., I suppose, but they will tell you Edward Snowden wasn't a criminal. He didn't do anything wrong. There's no reason for that. That's something that we believe in mass, but for some reason our government does not act that way. That's not how they're guided operationally for some reason. The U.S. government, they made Julian Assange plead guilty to crimes, right? And they released him from jail. And people, I was personally a part of a group that was, trying to advocate for that. But the idea here was, people don't understand. That's a message when you have to plead guilty to that, to anything like that. That's a very, and people need to understand this message, because there was a case called the Pentagon Papers, where Daniel Ellsberg basically blew the whistle on a report that was done that showed how crazy it was for us to really be in Vietnam. And the president was outright lying to the people at this time. So he came out with these papers. Of course, the mainstream media, the state-funded media, they denied a lot of times to say no, to basically just publishing the papers in general, and it's gotten a lot worse, and we'll talk about that now. But he wanted to give these papers to people. He wanted to give these papers to the publications and show them that. And there's a few that said, hey, okay, we'll take it, and they actually did their job in terms of actually basically publishing the papers and showing that. And there were a lot that didn't. But the real kicker is that at the end of the day, Daniel Ellsberg went to jail. He went to prison, or he was arrested. But in court, they found out, or they basically said, hey, look, this was corruption, you uncovered it. We can't really, let's just go ahead and drop all these charges, because this is actually ridiculous that you're actually, being blamed for wanting to tell the American people, basically uphold the ideals that we try to advertise for. We can't really say you did anything wrong here. Julian Assange, or not Julian Assange, but Daniel Ellsberg worked in those areas. He was a contractor, I believe, and then he worked for the government, and then he went back to contracting. But in any case, he actually was a whistleblower. He, in terms of actual being, there's a difference between being a whistleblower and being and publishing whistleblowers and whistleblowers information. You can legally go after the whistleblower. There are loopholes to do that, so they attacked him as a whistleblower. What they did to Julian Assange was not a whistleblower. He did not work for the government. He published documents that were leaking. That he was punished as a publisher. You need to understand that difference in terms of the moral erosion that had to occur for us to really say, oh, he is guilty and he deserves to be in prison. You need to people really do need to come to a realized moment in terms of how dark this place has gotten in terms of that idea. So when you talk about the CIA today, how things are now, there is absolutely no reason to believe that the CIA has been reined in any way or shape. There is the atmosphere, the culture, it is a problem, right? And for those that don't know, we had Edward Snowden was, he was our guy that blew the whistle on, kind of 2001, or with the 9/11, basically the crazy overreach that was happening and that was taking place. Before that, then that wasn't really with the spying, but it was with the Vietnam War. So Daniel Ellsberg had a really rein-in moment for the government in a huge way. But there was also a concept of the Frank Church Committee. They reined in a lot of, or they really held They held a lot of people accountable, even though I've heard that we haven't gotten everything from the Frank Church Committee in terms of everything hasn't been released. So maybe not everything, but a lot of aspects of the FBI, the COINTELPRO stuff was crazy. J. Edgar Hoover was actually really gun-ho about creating a spy network under the guise of fighting communists. We do monstrous stuff to fight communism. It's crazy, but we haven't had that moment for COVID. We have not had that moment. That moment has not seen the light of day yet for COVID. We have heard we've heard the rumbles, right? A lot of us have heard rumbles you're deplatforming, people under this idea, and it's kind of wild. Yeah, YouTube got stringent. We've seen very much the symptoms of an off-the-rails government, but we did not see something tell us oh, this is the problem. This is the real problem. These are the real things going on. And when it comes down to the CIA, what we're seeing today with these guys come out and say that, oh, we're ex-CIA, and I've seen this the curly-haired guy comes out, I'm ex-CIA, I'm gonna tell you, oh, that's great, you can tell us everything about what the CIA really wants us to know. That'd be really, really nice. And then this woman, I thought I was in a Twilight Zone when I first heard her say that, hey, yeah, I was a CIA and I really wanted to serve my country. I'm like, what? There is, what? And let's talk about the only way someone is to be trusted when they claim they are no longer an operative today. They're receiving refuge in Russia, and the US is calling them an enemy of the state. They're on their deathbed waiting to create apology letters and need you to write what they have to say. If you're ever at a party and someone introduces themselves as ex-CIA, assume the place is bugged. Assume the food is poisoned or drugged. Leave the party and make sure to take any persons that you love. Because the only reason someone would introduce themselves as ex-CIA is if they want you to trust them and believe they should hold an authoritative place. Michigan, blink twice, okay? Just blink twice if you're in trouble.